Good afternoon, everybody. And thank you very much for the warm introduction. It really is a pleasure to be here today, particularly in the context of COP, where we really need to emphasize the message that food waste really and truly is feeding climate change. So I'm Jamie Crummie, one of the co-founders of TooGoodToGo. And before we get going, I'll probably tell you a bit more about my story and getting into food waste. So I have always been someone who's been motivated by social and environmental impact. And it was, through my background, which I've had the pleasure and the joy of traveling all across the world. And it was while I was abroad that I actually started working in various different industries. And one of these was the events industry, where I experienced food waste at such a huge scale. But fast forward a little while, and it wasn't until I was at an event where I met some people who were repurposing food. And as someone who comes from a background in human rights, in social impact and environmental justice, I was blissfully unaware as to the scale and gravity of food waste. And that is sort of where my passion for it came from. But enough about me. What I really want to focus on is how food waste and how technology can be the solution to it. So I think in terms of contextualizing things, it's really worthwhile just framing the scale of the problem of food waste itself. 40% of the food that we produce ends up being wasted. 40%. It really is quite shocking, and this really has profound implications from a social, environmental, and financial perspective. Globally, we're spending over $1.2 trillion every single year on throwing food away. Here in the UK, we spend about £20 billion on food that ends up being thrown away. And again, putting this into some sort of context, we spend about £2.5 billion on our annual police budget. So we spend 8 times more on throwing food away. It really doesn't seem to add up. And then socially, there's 870 million people that go to bed hungry. Food poverty is a huge, huge problem. Yet the fact that we're producing enough food to feed everybody, food waste is really the true injustice here. So I guess, focusing on the environmental perspective because of where we are at COP, food waste itself accounts for 10% of the world's greenhouse gas emissions. That's food waste, not food production. And as a result, if food waste was a country, it would be the 3rd largest greenhouse gas emitter after the US and China. And again, for some reason and somehow, food waste just isn't part of the conversation here at COP. I wonder why. But the problem with food waste, when we are throwing food away, it's not just the plate of food in front of us, but rather it's the resources which go into creating that food that cause such a huge environmental problem. When we're throwing food away, we're wasting the land that has been used to produce this food. We touched on earlier in some of the previous speeches about deforestation. We use a landmass the size of China to produce food which ends up being thrown away. When we throw food away, it's a waste of the labor. It's a waste of the electricity throughout the food value chain. It's a waste of the fuel which transports food from farm to fork. A waste of the water. It really is, and on top of that, it's a waste of the fertilizers as well, which are really damaging our soils. But what I really want to focus on, and if there is one thing I could leave with you, it is that reducing food waste is the number one solution that we as individuals can take against climate change. And this is because it is the most immediate, most impactful, and simple action that we can take. Now, this all comes from research done by Project Drawdown in March of last year. And again, the same message keeps coming up. Why isn't food waste on the agenda at COP26? And the problem here is food waste is feeding climate change. Here in the UK, 70% of the British public are unaware of the connection between climate change and food waste. And one of the things I want to say is how technology and innovation in technology can really help bridge this gap to ensure that we have citizen and business engagement, which I really think is fundamental to solving the food waste crisis. So a bit more about us here at TooGoodToGo. Well, we dream big. Our ambition really is a planet with no food waste, and we intend to get there by inspiring and empowering people to work together. It really is this notion of collaboration and working with each other that we can achieve this goal. Now, our strategy, it hinges on these 5 pillars here. Our platform, which I'll go into in a moment, is a online marketplace which connects consumers with businesses who have surplus food for sale. But we go much more than that. As I said, our mission really is a big one. So it involves us working with schools so that we can inspire the youth of today so they won't continue making the same wasteful mistakes and habits as we do tomorrow. It's working with businesses and households to go more in terms of engaging people on food waste. It's about public affairs as well. What can we do to help spark some policy change to shake up our food system? But moving on to our platform, it really is a simple, innovative idea, a simple problem to a very complex issue. Now, we are the world's largest B2C marketplace for surplus food. We operate in over 17 countries globally. We have over 120,000 businesses which we work with, and over 45 million consumers who together fight food waste with us and have rescued over 97 million meals from going to waste. And, pardon the pun, but, that really does, emphasize the appetite for individuals and businesses to start fighting food waste. Now, the businesses we work with are very much an eclectic mix. They range from, independent businesses through to high street coffee chains and supermarkets in the forms of Starbucks and Costa Coffee to Carrefour and Morrison's. Now, on to the good bit. How does this platform work? As I mentioned, it is about simplicity. It is about accessibility. Users simply log on to the TooGoodToGo app, and they'll see a whole host of different food businesses. You purchase what we refer to as a magic bag or a surprise bag. You purchase this through the app and then collect it from that business during an allotted collection window. It really is, as I say, this simple way to fight food waste. Now, we term this very much our triple win. It's a win for the individual as we're able to discover new foods, discover new flavors, all at prices that don't cost the earth. Another pun. But it's also a win for businesses. They're able to recover sunk costs, reduce their waste disposal costs, reach a new customer, and ultimately not have to throw their food away. I think we'll struggle to find anyone who works in the food sector who enjoys throwing their core product away on a daily basis. But ultimately, it's a win for the planet. By using platforms like this, by using technology, we're not having to throw food away at scale. But importantly, going back to that opening message I said at the beginning, how technology can be this vehicle for change. And we're seeing it already. I mentioned there that nobody likes throwing food away. In fact, we've done some research which finds that 90% of individuals working within the food sector evoke emotions of distress, of sadness, when they're having to throw food away. But using innovative platforms such as TooGoodToGo, they're empowered to do something about this. From a consumer perspective, we can see how this again can be a vehicle for consumer change. 88% of the public want to be doing more when it comes to sustainability. And in fact, 76% of our users find our app very simple to use and often return to our partners as full-paying customers. So I guess what I'm trying to say here is with technology and what we've taken on board is our solution, it needs to be simple. It needs to be accessible, but it also needs to be fun. And when I talk about this, simplicity, the very nature of our app is simple. As I said before, it's a simple solution to a complex issue. But it's also talking about accessibility. If we, again, use the UK, we're here in Scotland as an example, 85% of the UK public have access to a smartphone. So in that sense, the solution is in our pockets. We just need to know how to use it. But it's also going to be fun. The whole notion of climate change, it can be very overwhelming, and we can often focus on the doom and gloom. But what is more fun than rescuing your favorite foods from your favorite food businesses, from your favorite restaurants? And that's what we're trying to harness here, is that we as individuals, but we as businesses as well, can do one small thing, and that one small thing can be rescuing food. So thank you very much, guys. I'll pause there for some questions.
Thanks very much, Jamie. And just some of the stats you've got there. And as an impartial civil servant, I cannot obviously do any brand promotion, but I was delighted to see that Andante Bakery around the corner from me was one of the people signed up to it. So you can see, your reach has extended globally. Did you expect, when you set up, there would be this massive traction, your latest stat of whatever, 98.4 million meals saved?
Of course, yeah, always. No, I think, if we reverse back 6 years to when we started TooGoodToGo, I think we would have bitten your arm off to have been in the position we are. But it really is, as I say, I think we're at this super positive stage now where I look at the future and I'm optimistic. And the numbers that we see here help fuel that. That the very notion that people are wanting to do something around food waste, and we have businesses standing up and proactively taking measures to reduce it as well is very, very positive.
We had a fascinating panel here by a number of folks looking at the issue of food waste in Scotland, but they all commented that food waste was not really on the COP26 agenda. Why do you think that is?
A really good question. Well, off the back of food waste not taking a central part of COP itself, I mean, our food systems alone, doesn't really feature at COP at all. When we look at some of the largest emitters for climate change, agriculture and our food systems account for between 25% and 30%. So it really doesn't make sense at all as to why food waste nor food systems isn't being discussed. Now, we actually launched a petition last week or the week before, actually calling on the UK government to bring food waste to the agenda at COP26. So, if anybody wants to show their support, you can sign the petition at www.fightfoodwaste.co.uk.
Brilliant. Thanks, Jamie. Daniel. Yeah. And I'll come to you, Matas.
Thank you so much for a great presentation. I must admit I've been using a lot of your application while still on university, so thanks for this. And my question is as following. I wonder, is there any mechanism of preventing providers from selling their regular products using your platform instead of offering the food that was supposed to be wasted, right?
So if I just understand the question correctly, so what can businesses do to proactively...
Actually, if there is any mechanism in your application that prevents restaurants from selling their regular products.
Right, okay. So what do we do to ensure that businesses are using our platform for surplus food as opposed to regular food? And a very, very good question. And that really stems from our business model. So the way in which our platform works is that food is typically advertised at a minimum of 3 times its original value. So if something is on the platform at £5, €5, $5, the end customer will be receiving approximately £15 or €15 or $15 worth of food. So as a result, the platform is very much a platform to recover sunk costs. It's not about generating profit. And if somebody can make profit of something which is a third of its original value, then I think we need to question why that was advertised at that original price. But we also have a very proactive account management team, which ensures that our partners are using our platform for the right reasons.
And in terms of any regulation, sorry, Matas, you had a question. Yeah.
Thanks for the puns. Really good puns. I really liked them. I was thinking if I was living next door to Chipotle and getting a discount of Chipotle every day, that might increase health of my body, decrease health of my body. Is there any measure how you choose the restaurants or the food providers that you operate with? Let's say, McDonald's is probably a big food waster, but that contributes to another issues. Do you tackle any of those somehow?
Sure. So I guess if I understand the question, we're talking about the nutritional implications of working with certain partners. Now, for us, our whole mission is focused around reducing food waste. And, in events like this, I always say to people, food waste sees no borders. Food waste is a global issue, and as a result, we need global solutions. And following that similar vein, for us, as I say, food waste doesn't discriminate. So we want to and we need to be working with everyone and anyone who is producing food which might be wasted. I don't want to stand here and say that I have the perfect diet. But again, for us, it's about focusing on food waste and empowering individuals and businesses to reduce that. Of course, there are things about the health implications of eating a certain diet, but our main focus is looking at reducing that in the first instance.
Brilliant. Jamie, unfortunately, that's all we got. Oh, no, well, I think we're going to have to leave it there, but it's always nice to have excess questions, so Matas, Jamie, have a chat afterwards. Jamie, thank you so much, and great to have this as an example of where companies solving this are able to scale and be global and be good. So it's a great case study. So thanks so much.
Thank you.
Please welcome Jamie.